where people can get help in an effective way. And so then the question becomes, what can people do? How can we empower individuals, let's say, to empower others?
Yeah, I guess sometimes the most powerful questions are the simple ones. So one of
It's a heavy question. I mean, listen, I'm asking you
no,
to
no,
solve.
it's a great question. That just like knocked me out. Like, okay, so like, okay, Todd, like, how do you do it? And I think here's one of my big things is sometimes when it comes to mental health and mental wellness and mental illness, the first thing that people say is, okay, so like, how are you finding a therapist? And on the one hand, I think it's great that as a community, we are doing better when it comes to awareness, and we're doing better when it comes to professionalizing it, and we're doing better when it's saying, okay, look, this is something you can talk about, this is something that you can get. What I find disempowering about that is that even in Orthodox communities where a lot of people are therapists, the vast majority of people are not therapists. And I think the vast majority of what we're talking about either doesn't won't exclusively be helped by therapy. There are lots of non-therapeutic supports that would make a massive difference. So for example, actually seeing and being present and listening to people makes a massive difference. And if you actually look at the research when it comes to the therapeutic process, across the board, the number one effective treatment is just listening and being with. And that's something that everybody can do. Everyone can notice and care and express. And when people say, oh, but I'm nervous about checking in, like, what if I'm wrong? Like, okay, let's play this out. If you notice and check in with someone by going, hey, it seems like everything's going wrong over there. Are you okay? Like, yeah. You might be adding stress to their life. If you call them up and go, hey, I noticed that you typically come to our card game Saturday night and you haven't come in a while. How are you? Awesome. So you just spread some extra love in the world. Like that's really the worst case scenario. When you're talking about, and I speak a lot to high school and college students, and I say, you're going to notice way before parents and teachers when people's baseline behavior shift. So notice that. Hey, I noticed this is going on. I wondered, can we chat? And I give workshops on what to say when you don't know what to say. Someone just got a rough physical diagnosis. Someone passed away and you're at a Shiva house. You notice a friend going through a rough time. Like, what do you say? And the answer is, nobody remembers what you say. There's no like page 62 of the manual that this is the right thing to say. What people remember is, how were you with them in that moment? Were you caring? Were you authentic? Were you present? Were you listening? And when we're able to be that with more people, that's what makes a tremendous difference. Like ultimately, as someone who with anxiety and depression, there's an experience of disconnection. So the antidote to disconnection isn't medication. Medication can help with the biological realities, but ultimately on a societal level and a relationship level, the answer is connection. So how can we create more connection? And when we feel that awkwardness and fear of going over to have that conversation, and by the way, like that's real. I don't want to discount that, especially if it's not something you've practiced before. And even if it has, to go over to a spouse, a child, a friend, and like, hey, I think something is going on. Do I want to insert myself there? Remind yourself why. And decide, okay, it is more important than my awkwardness that person feels seen, and is more important than my awkwardness that we're connected right now. And the more conversations that you have and the more that you do to put your hand out, the more likely they are, when something really is going on, to approach you and feel comfortable approaching you. And especially if they're the type of person who's feeling disconnected in that moment, they're waiting for someone else to come over because they're scared they're going to be rejected if they reach out, or they don't have the strength to reach out, or they don't think they matter enough to reach out. So to have someone say you matter, wow, that's life changing. And that's something all of us can do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting that you're mentioning this, because today I was going through some of our old content on our website, our blog, and we have a lot of stories of mentors, right? Of that we share and on our emails, on our different social channels, and so many of the stories are expressing exactly that, right? Like what was the pivotal moment that helped the mentee, was when the mentor said, in one way or another, I'm here for you. I support you. I'm there with you. I want to help you. They're not trained professionals, although they do have clinical supervision. They're not trained professionals. They're just people, and they're saying, I'm here for you. And one of the things I was thinking about today, and you're reminding me again, is sort of like, I feel like historically, certainly in the Jewish community, that there was this effort, there has been this effort to, let's call it, and I'm no fan of this way of saying it, breaking stigma, right?
Oh,
Mental
stomp
health.
out the stigma. It's all about the alliteration, man. We're stomping out the stigma. What is the stigma? Who knows? What are we stomping on? I don't know. We're typically not a violent people, but we're going to stomp it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So and specifically, I think also with mental health, right? And so the image that I think about, right, with breaking mental health stigma is, I imagine, I grew up in the five towns, and I'm driving around, and I see on the bumper sticker on the car in front of me says break the stigma. So that message is on the back of that person's bumper sticker, right? They're directing it at me. And I don't mean this in any negative way at this person, because I don't think, it's not like a conscious effort that this person is making. But the message is that we need to spread awareness. Spreading awareness doesn't have to do with me. It has to do with you. I want to spread awareness to you. I'm already aware, right? It's you who needs to become aware. And that, I think, when I mentioned before, this sort of distinction between awareness and acknowledgement, right? Mm-hmm. What you're talking about, when you're talking about communities supporting one another, it's about acknowledgement. It's about acknowledgement that this person is experiencing something. I might also at times experience something. And how can we support each other? How can I be there for someone else? Being there for someone else, awareness isn't going to help with that. Awareness maybe is a first step that something exists, but acknowledging that it exists, in my mind, and it's just a diction thing, it's not a real sort of distinction, but in my mind, there's such a big difference between those two things.
Right. I think there is a massive difference. As you're talking about the metaphor of the back bumper, I'm like, oh, but what's on the front bumper? Is that where he's going with this? But there is a massive difference between awareness. You say acknowledgement. I say from awareness to action. Because it's one thing, we're now aware, like we've read the book. Great. Now, what are you going to do about it? And when I started, I was definitely in the stomping out the stigma camp. The first speech really publicly I ever gave was at an Active Minds event at Yeshiva University, where it is about stomping out the stigma. And at the time, that might have been where our community was at. Okay, we just need to start talking about this. But, and this is true, by the way, of any behavior, is when you remove one negative behavior, what are you replacing it with? And I think that's what needs to be added to the stomping out the stigma. Okay, we are stomping out the stigma. We are raising awareness, and therefore we're introducing, is it accessibility? Is it action? Is it empathy training for educators? Is it parenting classes? Is it strategies for self-management? Is it having, we had a whole thing around Pesach time of pick up the phone and reaching out to people who were alone for Starim. Is it like there are so many both small things and big things and small things that are actually big things that once you become aware, okay, what are you going to do? And I think that's something that Kavla Noir is excellent. Is okay now that as a school we're aware that this
I
is
agree.
something.
I agree with you.
What are we doing? Oh, so we're training educators. What are we training educators in? They're not therapists. Okay, but you can train them in listening skills. You can train them in signs to notice. It's something we've had this conversation about mental health first aid and mental health first aid Israel. You don't need to be a therapist to know, okay, how do I assess a situation? How do I listen? How do I give encouragement? Do I know the same way that if there's a physical situation, you call 911? Okay, who do I call if there's a mental situation that I need to figure out? For myself, do I have my own plan, even if not on an extreme level, of, okay, when I feel down or when I feel disconnected or when I feel anxious or when I feel stressed, what do I do? And these are all practical things that for so many reasons we often don't have conversations around. And when we break the stigma, increase awareness, or whatever it is, now there's this space. And what are we as a community? What are we as a family? What am I as an individual going to fill that space with?
Yeah. Yeah. It's such an interesting thing. And you mentioned, at the end, sort of like, what do individuals do? And being aware of what we do when we feel stressed, I feel is in many ways perhaps a first step to understanding that other people feel stressed. Because it's so easy for us to sort of get caught up in our own world and feelings without maybe even realizing that they're feelings, and going from stressor to response to stressor to response to stressor to response. But even this acknowledgement, and that perhaps is a first step. And you know like therapy doesn't help because it's educating someone. That maybe is a part of it, but it's about processing those emotions, and maybe that's the first step for people, to help them to understand the experience of another person, to be able to see that another person is drowning in anxiety or depression, is to understand that they also feel anxious sometimes, and the way that they deal with it is through X or Y or Z. So they do feel it and they do deal with it.
Yeah. And what you just said, I think, is one of the reasons why I think it's so important that people who have this lived experience share it. Because in every time I've ever spoken, there's been at least one person that comes over and goes, how did you get inside my head? Or I thought I was the only one who felt that way. And because emotions are an internal experience, we don't recognize that, oh, there might be other people who experience this. Or, and this was definitely true for me, I just thought what I experienced was normal, or that everyone experienced the world the same way that I did, because I just assumed, oh, I experienced it this way, everyone else experiences it this way also. And it took someone from outside of my world to sort of be that intervention for me. Hey, like, things can be different. And when we share our stories or offer tools, it normalizes conversations. And I think is often empowering to people. Hey, like, here are tools that you can use. Here are mindsets that you can use. And I do want to acknowledge, because I think it's important, that the conversation we're having is focused more on, we'll call it the depression, anxiety side of the spectrum. And that's like the over stress side of the spectrum, and a little bit less, although we could talk about it, of the suicidality, bipolar, schizophrenia, OCD. Even within the stomping out the stigma in Jewish community, it's definitely, not even in air quotes, it is safer to talk about anxiety and depression. It is to talk about a lot of the other diagnoses. that I just mentioned. And also when it comes to the type of intervention that's required, it is more intense. There are more resources, eating disorders, then, okay, so here are some of the tools and here's the conversations that can be had. And I think it's important to explicitly acknowledge that, because otherwise it reinforces, oh, we can talk about these, but we don't talk about those. And to recognize, okay, on a communal level, where we might need to do a better job of educating or investing resources or treating with the same level of dignity and respect, and not be scared to talk about that, the same way that we're starting not to be scared of talking about things in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's such an interesting, the fact that people draw a line anywhere is I guess an interesting point here, right? Like why draw a line in one place versus another?
Yeah, so I have lots of fun answers for that one. Also, full disclosure, my definition of fun tends to be different than most people's. My staff over the summer, I run a summer camp, and I said, oh, we're going to do a fun activity tonight. They're like, Mark, fun as in game or fun as in intense reflective activity? I'm like, what's the difference? They're all fun. So I think there are a few reasons for that. One is with the question that you started with. Hey, I sometimes feel anxious. I sometimes feel depressed. There's something, okay, I might not get the level to which you're talking about, but at least I have a kernel of understanding. I don't think that's true of schizophrenia or mania. Oh, I have a kernel of understand. Like, I don't think you do. And I think that could make it more difficult to empathize with. I think pop culture plays a major role in what are the immediate associations that come to mind when you hear specific diagnoses. I think that plays a major role. I think the prevalence of the diagnoses makes a difference. I think the fact that hospitalization is required for some as opposed to others makes it like another, at an external perception, that's another level, like
More severe.
And I hate to say this, but just to acknowledge the way I think society talks about it, it's like, oh, like there's minor league and then there's major league, and the severity, I think, makes in people's minds, oh, that we can't really talk about. I also think it's starting to change. There are a lot of parents of children who died by suicide who are now willing to talk about it, or someone like Shani Markowitz has done a tremendous job talking about her mom and sharing her life story. The Marins in Jersey, these are people who are very public about it, and I think it makes a tremendous difference every time someone is willing to say, this is something that we need to talk about, because not talking about it doesn't exist. Not talking about it just means that someone is hurting in silence.
Yeah. And I think we're having an event in a next, on the 18th, on January 18th, with Tali Rosenbaum. I don't know if you know who that is. She's a sex therapist. And so I saw something that she posted today on Instagram, was sort of about spousal abuse, right? And so it's an interesting point. What I'm trying to say is that you're saying, meaning you're talking about that people structure things as, let's call it in a bad terminology, minor and major league, right? But there's also this element of, like, you can't really know, right? You can't really know what another person's experience is. right? And I think that that's such an important thing when we're talking about something like anxiety or depression, right? Where you might not see it, right? But you don't know what this person's feeling is, and there's no way to really rate, what's more important on an individual level, right? What this person's experiencing is significant for them, and I think that is what's helpful when we talk about acknowledging, right? Everyone has had a hard time, and that's all that you really need to understand that someone else is having a hard time. You might not understand the severity of the hard time that they're having, but you can understand that they're having a hard time and that they have needs the same way that you had needs in that time.
Yeah, like when you say acknowledging, the word that came to mind for me was honoring somebody else's experience. And it's not, because that's one of the things people are like, not minimizing. And there can be this sense, and I am contractually obligated to mention Brene Brown in any presentation I give. She doesn't know that I mention her in every presentation that I give, but one day she'll find out. And it's what she calls is a silver lining it, is when someone comes to something like trying to find the silver lining, and we think it's to make the other person feel better. 99% of the time, the reason why we're doing it is to discharge our own discomfort about what's being shared. So we try to, oh, but at least, or, oh, but what about, or, oh, what if we like honor the other person's experience by allowing them to have their experience. Honor the fact that they trusted you to share this experience with, and recognize that, especially if it's the first time they're sharing or opening up to you about something, chances are they're just opening the door a little bit to see how you respond. And if you're there and fully present and caring, then they'll open up the door and really let you in. And there's no bar that the other person needs to jump over in order for it to be considered a real thing, if it's real to them. And that's also true, by the way, of yourself in asking for support. A question I get all the time is, oh, how do I know when I should ask for support? Or how do I know when I should check in with them? I say, look, it's not a video game where, oh, if you're above a 68 pain level, then you're allowed to ask for support. But if you ask at a 66, then you're going to be thrown out of the office. Again, let's play out the scenarios. You go and ask someone for support and they say, you know what, this is totally normal. It's all good. Great. Now you know. You go and ask someone for support and they say, you know, this is something to be concerned about. Here's a couple of techniques. Let me know how it goes. Let's check. Is it okay if I check back in with you? Amazing. You go to ask someone for support and they go, wow, this sounds really serious. I think that, like, would you be comfortable if we went to this person, spoke together? Okay, now you're getting the support that you need. All of those scenarios are a win. And the same with checking with other people. Worst case scenario, assuming you're sensitive about it, you just created more connection in the world. Awesome.
Yeah, I think that it speaks so much to this idea of advocacy, right? Because sometimes I feel, and maybe it's in my space as working at Kavla Noir, that people don't take mental or emotional health seriously enough, right? Or I don't think that people appreciate the value of it. But when you're talking about, right, when you say, when you go to someone and you ask them for support, right, what's the worst case that could happen? And I think that for so many people, the question maybe begins before that. Who would I even go to for support? Right? What is the nature of my relationships that in my life? Who can I ask for support? And if we're recognizing that these things are serious experiences, which they are, right? People's emotional pain is a serious experience, and it certainly inhibits them from succeeding in life, the same way that someone having a broken leg or a physical injury or a medical situation would inhibit them from succeeding in life. So then we need to make the environment, as we said before, one that people feel comfortable and people know and understand who they can reach out to for support. Because I think at this point
And
that many people wouldn't know. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
And I'll go one step further. And yes, I'll build upon what I said earlier. The worst case scenario, the worst case scenario is that you get shamed, it gets minimized, you feel small, and you never ask for support. Like that's the actual worst case scenario. The reason why I phrased it the way that I did is because most people already play out that scenario in their head. And I want to show that there are other possibilities for when you ask, and that most of the time, they're not intentionally going to shame you out of the office. But to answer your question, I think it's not only that people don't know who to go to, which is true, but it's also what I call the fallacy of the open door policy. And a lot of schools and camps will get up on the first day, and if you ever have an issue, there's an open door. Okay, but do you know what that also does? It puts the responsibility on the person who's being bullied, on the person who's feeling disconnected, on the person who's feeling withdrawn, anxious, and overwhelmed, to somehow summon the inner strength and courage to walk through a door that you say is open, which they may or may not experience that way. How incredible would it be? And yes, that's their responsibility. You have a responsibility to advocate for yourself. That is true. And I don't want to take away that responsibility, because I think if we take away that responsibility, we also take away that individual's power to ask for support and advocate for themselves. And I think people need to be reminded that they actually do have the power to ask and advocate for themselves. And it doesn't have to involve them sharing their entire life story in that moment. It could be going over to someone that they're close with, however they want to define that, and say, hey, I've been going through a rough time. Can we find some time to talk? And that could be it. That's all you need to share at that moment. And then they'll get it or they won't. And if they get it, great. If not, find somebody else. But it's not fair of educational institutions, especially, to put the entire onus and responsibility on, oh, but we have an open door policy. If we have an open door policy, but you don't leave your office and walk out the door, I say this and I believe this, you have failed as an educator. You are not actively noticing, you're not searching, you're not looking. And Dvar Torah, since it is Kabbalah Noah and we are in Israel, so we'll throw in one Dvar Torah, is when we see Yosef being thrown into the pit. So Yosef gets thrown into the pit. I very much identify with that story. My Hebrew name is Yosef. According to Tanakh, Pasha Pshat, just looking at the verses, how does Yosef react? And according to the verses, it doesn't say. Doesn't say. If you look at Parshat Vayeshev. But if you go to Parshat Miketz, all of a sudden, the brothers are talking and they say, oh, B'tchaneno aleinu v'lo shmatem v'gam damo hinei nidrash. He called out to us and we didn't listen, and now we're responsible. So what changed? Like, how come when he was thrown into the pit, it doesn't say anything? But all of a sudden, a few pages later, it's, oh, but now he was crying out. And I haven't read this anywhere, but I offer two interpretations. One is it was silent, not because Yosef wasn't crying out, but because the brothers weren't listening. And because the brothers weren't listening, he was effectively rendered silent. And it was only later on, when the brothers really acknowledged here's what was going on, that they effectively heard his screams. Second interpretation is he actually was silent, which isn't such a crazy response. If you think, oh, he's thrown into the pit, he's totally separated from everyone, and the Torah didn't record anything because he actually didn't cry out. But the brothers only recognized later that just because he wasn't crying out, just because he was silent, doesn't mean that he wasn't crying out. And just because he was silent doesn't mean that he wasn't in tremendous pain. And just because he was silent doesn't mean that they weren't responsible, because they weren't bothering to look and they weren't bothering to listen. And I think sometimes as educators, as parents, as friends, oh, but I don't hear anything. so therefore everything must be okay. Versus what am I doing to look? What am I doing to listen? Not what am I doing to diagnose. I'm not saying everyone should start going around, oh, that person has this and that person has that. But not like, am I actively looking outside myself to my community as an educator, as a camp director? Am I looking? Am I hearing? Am I leaving my office? Am I creating an environment where I am putting my hand out, where I am jumping into the pit and I'm being with? So that way I notice things that can start the conversation. And I'm creating the sorts of relationships in my life, my friends, and with my students that they feel comfortable, as you described, to reach out to me and to talk to me. And what does that require from me? And that's something that I think we get to have more conversations about. What does it require of me?
Absolutely. And I think it speaks so much also, it's a beautiful Dvar Torah, and I think that it speaks so much to this notion of honoring, right? Like we spoke before, as opposed to, let's say, awareness, that everyone knows that something exists. But if I have no engagement with that thing, if I know that it exists, theoretically, it doesn't do anything to manifest change for the individuals who exist in the community. It does something maybe for the people who are, it feels good to spread it, and it's important to spread that these things do exist. But like you had said before, that's step one. Step two is to be able to acknowledge it, to be able to honor another person's experience, that they're having an experience, whatever that may be. Regardless of we can talk, I'm sure that you and I can talk for hours about the value or
Sure
lack of value that diagnosis has. Yeah, exactly. I'm sure that we touched on all these topics then as well. And the value or lack of value that exists for a diagnosis, right? And I think that it's so important in this conversation. At Kavanagh, we like to talk about emotional health, right? Because emotional health, in a certain sense, is less relatable because no one ever heard of it. What does that mean, right? But for us, it's more relatable because it encompasses every single person's experience. It's how they deal with stress, and everyone deals with stress, whether it's someone who is challenged with schizophrenia or whether it's someone who has never had a diagnosis. Maybe they would have a diagnosis if they saw someone, but they never, like you had said, appreciated anything like that, right? They never appreciated, maybe I should go and see somebody. And the more that we acknowledge and can honor somebody's experience, another's experience, or our own experience for that matter, I think that's what you're speaking to. That's what I'm hearing anyways.
Yeah, 1,000%. And like talk about emotional health, again, that's something anyone can do. Like I remember when I was in therapy for the first time, definitely not the last time. And one of the things that we practiced was how to say I feel statements, because I would respond I think to everything. Like, how was your day? No, I think it was good. Okay, but how did it feel? No, I think everything went. And like we actually had to practice. Okay, I feel like, let's acknowledge like what are emotions. What are you feeling right now? Are you capable of tapping into what you're feeling, and are you capable of expressing that? And again, that's something that everyone can do. What are the conversations you're having around your table? Are you open about emotions and what you're feeling and challenges and difficulties, and how you're also potentially solving them? Like, this isn't about, oh, I need to wallow or I need to publicly share all of my most intimate, like, oh, just like how like legitimately, how are you feeling? And by the way, for anyone who says fine, fine is an acronym for well, we're not going to use the inappropriate one, but there is one of them that's inappropriate. But the other one is feelings I'm not expressing. The other one is effed up, insecure, neurotic, and I forget the E. But I prefer the feelings I'm not expressing. Like, how are you And what conversations are you having with people? And it might be uncomfortable sometimes for people at first to be honest with their feelings. But again, just because you don't talk about something doesn't mean that it's not there. It just means that it's happening without being addressed. And how much healthier would we all be if we could openly connect in really deep ways, if we could ask for support and make ourselves available for support in times when we need it, and honestly, in times when we don't.
Yeah. And I think, you're so, and I appreciate it so much. And I think it's so important, for you as an advocate that you're so open. And one of the things, that's a part of that is, you talked about fun, and maybe your fun is not fun for everyone, but there's also this element of being able to joke about things, and I'm thinking now about how relevant that is. You mentioned the word healthy, and I think that outside of the phrases of mental health or emotional health, we don't think about our mental wellness or our emotional wellness in terms of being healthy or not healthy, right? Those things are phrases that we categorize someone's mental health or someone's emotional health issues, but not about us being healthy. And when I see you, joking about things, I see such an important piece of being healthy.
Yeah, I mean, so part of joking is deflection, not gonna lie, that's a piece of it. And part of it is, I believe that if we can't laugh about something, we can't talk about it seriously either. It's also a great way of breaking the ice with teenage and college students when you make jokes about depression and they're like, are we allowed to laugh or not? And you go, no, it's important that you laugh. I'm already depressed. I need it for my self-esteem. And then they're really not sure if they can laugh or not. But I do that point about healthy, I think is critical, because let's take physical health. Like there is this concept of, we'll leave diet culture aside for a second, but that idea of what I put in my body matters. How much I sleep matters. How active am I during the day matters. And you'll have people talk about what does it mean to lead a physically healthy lifestyle. I find a lot of the times when we talk about mental health, mental illness, mental wellness, it's in the problem solving category. Oh, I need to manage my stress. I need to manage my anxiety. And all these other, oh, now that this thing has happened, how do I respond to it? Versus, and I think this is where, as you said, the mental health, but actual like healthy mental health. Okay, what is that? What does mentally healthy look like for me? What are the things in my life that bring me joy? And am I making sure to schedule those as part of my week? Who are the people that I like to connect with? How do I make sure that connection is happening during my week? How much sleep am I getting? Again, what am I eating? How active am I being? What does my screen time look like? What am I reading? Who am I surrounding myself with? How much time did I spend doom scrolling today? Like, one of my favorite memes is, there's so much good doom out there. How am I supposed to get through it all? Okay, maybe you don't need to get through all of the good doom. The way 2020 and 2021 is going, there'll be plenty of doom tomorrow that you can also scroll through. And that mental health isn't just in the category of, oh, this crisis happened, what do I do now? But like, what are the healthy habits that I can cultivate? What's my parachute that if and when something really stressful happens, that I know how to respond? Because it's very hard in the moment to figure that out. But what if I had my plan? Here's the person that I call. Here's the activity that I know. Here's the treat that I've been saving for myself that I could really use at the moment. Here's my happy playlist. Yeah, for some people, meditating in the bubble bath while getting massage while listening to Anya. Like, if that's your self-care regimen, good for you. It's about finding what works for you. and then doing that, and not falling into this self-care trap, which is a whole different conversation. Just living a mentally healthy and physically healthy lifestyle is something also we can all do and can talk more about.
Yeah, I think it's, you mentioned like this notion of like a parachute. And for me, when I think of parachute in terms of emotional and mental well-being, I think about proactivity, right? How, like you're saying, how can I set up my life in such a way that I'm going to be mentally and emotionally well? Or am I going to maximize my mental and emotional wellness? And I think that humor, and maybe say we're getting into an hour here, so maybe we should end soon. But I think humor is so important because nobody is. It's not a zero sum game. Mental and emotional well being. And I think that that's the most important thing here, right? And like you're saying, humor is deflection, right? But it's also an important piece there because things come up, and the question isn't whether they're going to come up because you can't control crisis. But what you can do is prepare and know how and work to get to a point that the way that you deal with a crisis is going to be effective. And humor is
Right. And the thing that I'll add to that, because I do think it's super important, and there'll be times also when it's ineffective. And there'll be times where you fail and you mess up. And if we were having this same conversation 12 hours ago, you would have found me not waking up at the time that I told myself I was going to wake today, and the work that I was going to do today, and the sink was not cleaned beforehand. And like, it's the equivalent of the Zoom. People are like, oh, like everything's so together. Like, yeah, just because you're seeing over here. If we were to take a quick tour of my metaphorical life at the moment, there's the laundry that's shoved over. And I say that's also okay, because you also need to give permission to the fact that there are times where the strategies work and there are times when they don't, and you need to try something different. And it's that tension between the self-compassion and self-forgiveness with, okay, you still need to be driven enough to work it out. And it's not about wallowing, it's about experiencing and giving permission to experience. And sometimes it's just one of those days or weeks, and okay, but tomorrow, what's going to be different tomorrow? And it's I read an article once that likened it to surfing and riding a wave, that if you try to ride against the wave, you're going to crash. And sometimes you just need to ride the wave, it peters out, and then there's a new wave to ride. And it's this balance of back and forth and establishing equilibrium. And I think both with physical health and with mental health, if we finally give up on this paradigm of there is a pinnacle to achieve, and once I get there, it's all good, and all the strategies are to climb the mountain to get to the peak, I'm going to plant my flag, and I am now a mentally and physically healthy individual. I think that's setting a lot of people up for failure. It's unattainable. That's not the way that life works. It's about expanding the toolbox. Like, as you could tell, I love metaphors. We can metaphor for days, because it's that back and forth. It's that back and forth. It's the response. And I think what does change, to bring it all the way back to the choosing and the Viktor Frankl, is how much time does it take? Like, I make a distinction between what's my reaction and what's my response. And we're all going to have our reactions. And maybe with time, we can train ourselves to have fewer reactions, but I don't believe it's possible to eliminate reactions. And when we react to something, okay, how much time does it take to respond, or how much time does it take to return to equilibrium? That, I think, is something we can work on and improve and build structures around. But the goal isn't to eliminate stress, negativity, emotions from our life. It's not possible. It's not human. I do think a goal can be, how do we manage it, or what do we choose to focus on? And how do we build our lives intentionally That's something that I think we all have the power to do on an individual level. And I would encourage anyone who's listening on a friend and communal level, when you're building that, to not just focus on what's going on with me internally, but to also be really caring and sensitive to what's going on with other people. Assume that they're doing the best that they can. And what can you do to encourage and support them as they're living their life? And if we live our lives that way, I think that would, on a broader mental and physical and spiritual health level, raise all of us up. And I also think that's something that all of us can do to reduce the level of mental illness within the community and ensure that people are getting support that they need to manage whatever is going on in their lives.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you so much.
And if anyone wants to stay afterwards for my actual depression jokes, they're more than invited.
Maybe you can set up a page for that and just, sort of.
There's only really 2 of them. It's one of the benefits of going around and speaking to lots of people, that although it is awkward because sometimes people come over to like, I don't know how to say this, but like, are you the depression guy? Like, yes, I'm the depression guy. What do you want to talk about? We could have a whole separate call about the impact of advocacy on the people doing the advocating and the labeling and public and private, what's shared, what isn't shared. But I feel as if the previous soapbox speech was a good energy, at least for my end.
It was great. It was fantastic. It was fantastic. Thank you, Marc, so much. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely. And anyone who does want to be in contact, marc.fein@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook and all your relevant social media platforms. Always happy to chat.
Great. Take care, Marc.
Take care.
Bye.